Hey, Naimul. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and welcome to the first episode of Connect Talks. Welcome to the Connect Network as well. And I assume you're joining from Singapore, right?
Yeah, correct. So it's 5 p.m. here.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's morning, it's 10 o'clock here. So, yeah, I'm starting the day, you're finishing the day, but let's try to keep the end. Let's see how it goes through the session. But really happy that you're here, really honored that you're here. And I was thinking that we can go a little bit into your journey leading up to Antler. So, no, I know you have been in Zalora, but for communities' benefit, if you could give us a quick wrap of how your journey led to Antler. So, the backstory.
Yeah, so I grew up in the countryside of Norway. Got a scholarship to United World Colleges in high school. Went to Atlantic College in the UK. Then I went back from that and served in the Norwegian military in Marine Commando, in the Norwegian Naval Special Forces. Went from there to Harvard. After Harvard, joined McKinsey. What happened in Harvard when I was there was 03, 07. A lot of great companies came out of campus. So obviously the most famous one being Facebook, which Mark Zuckerberg created in 2004. In the early days, I knew everyone on Facebook. Now I only know some of the people on Facebook. And I got very excited about technologies. In McKinsey, I ended up working with tech companies all across the globe. Then I left to build my own tech company called Zalora.com, which is the biggest fashion e-commerce business in Southeast Asia. We sold that in 2015 to Global Fashion Group, which later IPO'd in Frankfurt. And then we saw this tremendous thing that there are two, I think, pretty large trends globally that we found very exciting. So one is innovation is becoming more distributed. So great entrepreneurs are building amazing companies out of anywhere. Like 20 years from ago, if you want to start a business, sure, you could start it anywhere. But if you're starting a tech business, you'd most of the time be better off building it in Silicon Valley. Now, that's not necessarily true anymore. You can build it out of anywhere because customer bases are global, capitalists become global, mentorship is global, connectivity is global, you can hire people globally. So you can build and compete against the world's largest companies out of anywhere. So that was one thing that we found very, very exciting. And, if you look at the stats, 10 years ago, 30 cities in the world that mostly were in the US and China had built unicorns. Now there's 170 cities. So I think for the people who are on the call, no matter where you are, you can build and compete against anyone from anywhere. And, obviously with Spotify beating Apple on their core entertainment segment, no Swedes should not think that way. And nobody in the Nordics should not think that way. So that was one. And the second thing that we found quite interesting is that if you look at why startups fail, number one reason is you don't have the right co-founder team. Number two reason is that the team was not working on the right thing. Number two reason is you couldn't raise capital. Number four reason is you couldn't access the first customer. And so you go down the list and you realize that all of the ones below number one is the decision of number one, right? So if you have a co-founder team decides what to build, a co-founder team will raise the capital. A co-founder team will get the first customer. So we just wanted to focus in on one thing, which was finding amazing founders and helping them build incredible teams that are working on solving problems that make sense. And we wanted to do that globally. So, Antler came out of the realization that these two areas are pretty big opportunities. And, now we built a global platform. We're across 30 different markets. In the Nordics, we're in Oslo, Stockholm, Copenhagen, and Helsinki. And we work with founders from all across the Nordics, but also people who want to come to the Nordics and build companies. But we're also in the rest of Europe, North America, South America, Africa, Asia, and Australia. So we can really support, I think, founders in building global businesses. And we focus in on those things, right? Finding great founders, ensuring that great founders get access to great co-founders, and ensuring that people are validating their business model before starting to build. And then we put in capital. And then we launched our later stage funds. So we can now if we back you in the first round, we can also back you in the second, we can back you in the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. And soon we'll launch our growth fund, so we can hopefully back our portfolio companies and founders all the way to their exit and be very long-term partners. So that's what we're aiming to do with Antler. Probably some of you have heard about us already. Some of you haven't. We know there are a lot of things we can work on to do better. But I think already now we're a very, very strong partner to great aspiring entrepreneurs who want to build great companies. And yeah, we'd love to work with you if that would be helpful in your journey.
Great. Awesome. Like a lot of insight in those few minutes, Magnus. But I really loved it when you started with the term distributed innovation. You talked about the various factors and how distributed innovation is the core driver, for example. And we saw a huge flood of global, like, how would you say this, online connectivity happening during the COVID times. What's your take during that period of 2-3 years around between 2020? In the last 2-3 years versus as is now, is globalization still driving with the same momentum? Because we see another side of globalization. There is a lot of political pressure on the political side for countries, for regions, and they're kind of becoming microcosms. So just wanted to know before we jump into more core discussion.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty clear that, yeah, sure, some people and some politicians are talking about deglobalization and this stuff, but it's pretty clear that that's just nonsense, right? The world is becoming more global every day, and there's a number of indicators that show that, right? So I think, yeah, sure, there is a chance, and obviously with the terrible war in Ukraine, Russia has been removed as a market, and to a certain extent, geopolitical conflicts and so on has separated some markets from China, right? But hey, there's 8 billion people in the world, and even if you can't access 1.5 billion people, it's still pretty large. So I think as a founder, you should definitely think of the world as global and continuing to become more and more global, and you see that. So amazing stats. So the airline industry, I think, is a great example. When the first commercial airline passenger flew, it took 68 years until 50 million people had flown on an airline. It took Twitter 2 years to get 50 million customers. It took the TV industry, which started 67 years earlier, 50 years to get 50 million customers. It took Pokemon Go 14 days. It took OpenAI couple of months to get 100 million customers, paying customers. And these are people from all across the globe. So, customer base are becoming global. The cost of expanding into new markets have gone down drastically, right? When we were building my last business, we had to build server parks, warehouses, logistics networks, payment systems, all this type of stuff, which was literally purpose built for the new markets that we launched. So it cost us $5 to $10 million to set up a new market. If you want to build the same business model now, you could literally launch a new market with like $4,000 or $5,000. So internationalization has become much cheaper. Capital has become global, right? We see it with Antler. So Andreas and Horowitz's first investment in Norway was in an Antler company. Y Combinator's first investment in Vietnam was an Antler company. We see all the world's best VCs backing Antler companies all across the globe. So it doesn't really matter so much anymore where you build your company. You can access the best investors. Mentors are becoming global, right? People like you, Naimul, and look at Sweden. You have so many incredible founders who can act as mentors. So the competitive edge of building something out of the valley is just it's still an amazing place to build companies. I'm not saying that. I'm a big believer and strong believer in building companies there. I'm just saying that the competitive edge is not that much. The difference is not as high as it used to be. And then there are tremendous opportunities of building things out of anywhere now that the world is truly global, because you can access local talent. You can sometimes set up structures that are more cost effective. You can hire remote organizations. You can also try out something in a small market before you go global. So there are so, this is a long way, again, to kind of answer your question, but I think the world is just becoming more and more global. So thinking about time, it's actually always better to build, tomorrow is always better than today to build a company. The issue with building a company tomorrow versus today is that, hey, life is short. So you should rather get started now. And the second thing is, if you look at the short-term perspective, we have another big advantage right now, which is we're just after peak, right? So historically, it's always better to build a company just after peak than leading into a peak. So for the people who are starting a business now or just started a business, sure, it might feel a little bit less, exciting, and not every single newspaper in the world is writing about tech, because there's less investments going on than you saw in 22 and 23. But historically, it's always the best time to build something. Like if you look at the last 20 years, the best times to build businesses have been just after the dot-com crisis and just after the global financial crisis. And we are in a similar situation now, obviously very different what happened in 2020, 2021, but 22, 23, 24 will most likely be the best time ever to build a company.
Awesome. I think I completely agree with you in terms of the timing. Like, now is the time to build. We talked a lot about distributed innovation, and from there we have been talking about globalization, or the way that entrepreneurs need to think global and act global and build global. So I think, taking that to Antler's context, like, you have built a machine which can now scale entrepreneurship, innovation, impact. So, like, taking ideas and really powering them up, and now you're launching your later funds. So I'm very curious about, how did you get all this together to start? Like, what were the core building blocks which were successful in your journey of getting Antler started and on the track to become a success? If we go there for a minute.
Yeah, so I think I think everyone's journey is a little bit different there. So like you should obviously take from this what is worth for you. But I always had this idea in my head that there are periods of your life that are preparatory, and there are periods of your life where you're actually doing exactly what you want to do. And you should aim throughout your life that you always get closer to spending the majority of your time on what you really enjoy doing, and where you think you can have the largest impact. And so if I think about, for example, when I was in the special forces, that was very exciting, and I felt we were doing an important thing, and I learned a lot and so on. But I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in the military. I loved Harvard because you learned a lot, but I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in academia. I loved McKinsey because you got to work with really amazing leaders and you learned a lot about business. But I didn't want to spend the rest of my life giving advice. And I loved building my last business because I was building a business, hiring people, solving an important problem. But at the same time, our mission was to make people better dressed. It was my life, making people better dressed. But it's getting like closer and closer to each other. And now, for the first time, I'm spending all my working hours working with incredible people who want to build amazing companies around solving important problems. But I couldn't have done what I'm doing now if I didn't do the stuff that I did earlier, right? Like, the reason why we can, in the early days, could attract great founders is because I built a great business in Southeast Asia. And the reason why I could be a good mentor and advisor to them is because I've done it myself. And if you look at the people in Antler who run our funds, they're typically exited founders who built great things themselves. And the reason why I could pull together a network of these types of people was partially also because I had that experience, and I pulled with me a lot of people I met throughout the years, which I think are amazing people. So that's kind of one is the journey to where we are now. The second is, I think as a founder, it's incredibly important to kind of understand the full potential of what they're doing. Like one thing is what they're doing right now, right, which is building a building block. And for us, that was finding some great founders we could back out of Singapore in 2018. But then, where can you ultimately go with this? And for us, we believe as a partnership that the only way civilization moves forward is if great people spend their time innovating. Because the world's biggest problems are not going to be solved by, in my opinion, by governments. They're going to be solved by people like you solving important problems. And thereby came the Antler mission of making progress inevitable. And I think, if you look at really great companies, there's typically at a high level kind of dimension or the impact you can have if you really, really succeed. And you won't have that from day one, right? But I think it will help all of you kind of bring on board the right people if there is a larger kind of meaning to what you're trying to achieve, which might take 5 years, might take 10 years, might take 20 years. You might never get there. But if you get 70% on the way or 50% on the way, it's a really worthwhile thing to do for really smart people in being part of that journey with you, right? And I think that helped us really get on board really strong people. And then you got to deliver, right? Get the flywheel spinning. So that those I think were the 3 steps, where one of them took, I started Antler when I was 37. So it took 37 years. Step 1 took 37 years. Step 2 took 3 to 6 months, and step 3 we're still executing on.
Okay, awesome. And okay, so that's your founder journey. And when you see startup founders, because you're a factory, like there are founders coming in, they're bringing in ideas, they're collaborating, and then they're building success stories out of that. What kind of seems to work in these teams of people or teams which come in and then exit successfully from Antler universe or stay on with the Antler universe and kind of succeed? What are the critical? I see there are some questions coming on chat, so we'll take them after this question. But what do you think are the key building blocks of a successful startup?
Yeah, so
based on what you have seen in Antler.
Yeah, so first of all, this kind of a comment to the question, and I'll answer your question. So I think factory is the wrong word because if a factory, you take raw materials and then the other side becomes a product, right? Which is like the opposite of what we're doing, right? It's like completely what we're doing. What we're doing is we're trying to find really exceptional people, really exceptional founders that would have succeeded very well without us. And then we're trying to do what we can to be as strong of a partner to them as possible, right? So we don't believe we can kind of magically turn anyone into an amazing founder. What we believe is we can be an attractive place for really great founders to find co-founders and help validate their business model, and that we can be a strong investor and long-term partner for building their company. So that's kind of one. Now, what is important to think about, I think there are 3 very basic things and then 3 learnings that I made on the way that might not be helpful for you. One is I think as a founder, it's very important to know what you're really strong at and then leverage that strength. And then know what you're weak at and ensure that you hire people that are great at those things you're not so good at. So, you then, understand why you're a great founder. And I think great founders have a spike, something they're really incredible at, drive, a combination of ambition and ability to execute. And 3, this grittiness, this attitude that failure is not an option, right? And you're not born with any of those, attributes. You can develop those. So if you don't think you're a great founder now, get a spike, get the required drive, and then ensure that you build mental resilience. And if you have that already, start building. So that's kind of 1 on the basic side. 2 is, once you know what your strength is, and find a few people that are very, very excited about working with you, that have some incredible strengths that will be helpful for you to succeed in building your business and build an amazing co-founder team. And the most important there, I think, is like meet a number of really, really, really smart people and spend real time with them and ask very difficult questions and then make a decision. Don't, pick someone because they happen to be available, or your brother or your sister because you know them your entire life. It's like very different kind of building a company with someone and being their friend or being their brother or sister, having worked together in a company. So spend real time meeting as many people as you can and then ask them difficult questions and pick the best one.
Okay.
And in Antler, we typically have cohorts of like 50 to 100 people who are working on this. So at least we can contribute 50 to 100 people on top of whatever network you have on your own. And then 3rd, spend time validating a business model to ensure that you're building something that makes sense. Unfortunately, there's quite a lot of really, really great teams out there that are building things that just doesn't make sense. And then it's very hard to make progress. And you can obviously iterate, but if you can save 3 years to start building something that makes more sense, or it's solving a real problem from day one, you save 3 years of your life and quite a bit of capital, and the chance of failure goes down quite considerably. So that's the basic stuff. Now, what are some of the learnings I made on the way? I think number 1 is front load. So, in the early days of Antler, it was only me for like a month or 2. And so what happened if I was watching Netflix or if I got drunk or whatever, right? So Antler, nothing happened with Antler. And it's the same, depending on what stage you are in now, the people are listening to this. If it's only you or one other or 2 other people, if you guys don't spend time working on the business, then the business just doesn't move forward because it's only you moving it forward. So shift time from tomorrow to today. The first 1 to 2 to 3 years of building a company should be insanely intense. And the people who succeed are people who optimize the amount of effective hours they can put into getting the business off the ground and creating early momentum. And if you don't front load, your likelihood of succeeding is pretty low, because the best founders in the world, they front load. They're like spending insane amount of time getting everything working in the early days. 2, learn how to hustle. So in the Nordics, I'm from Norway as well, there's, the famous jantelov that you shouldn't think you're better than anyone else. And if somebody says no, just walk away. As a founder, you can't do that. You gotta leave your pride behind, and you gotta get comfortable with no's. Try to convert some of them into yeses, whether you're trying to hire people or whether you're trying to get an investor on board or whether you're trying to get your first customer. And learn from people who are great salespeople. Be a storyteller. Reach out to many. Don't pull out any trick in the book to kind of get great people on board, get great investors on board, get customers on board, because you're going to get a lot of no's in the way. Right? We talked about Spotify earlier. I think they went to like 23 VCs before the first one said yes. And any founder in the world know how many no's you get. So you need to learn how to hustle. And this doesn't come. You're not born typically like that in the Nordics, because culturally we're supposed to not hustle. So just throw that whole thing away. And then leave your pride behind and learn how to hustle. And then the 3rd is this mindset of failure not being an option. I think it's okay to have failed in the past, right? And you learn from that. but you can't go into a new project thinking that you might fail. So you need to completely change if you're worried about failing when you're building your business, the likelihood is that at some point in time you'll give up, because that's even an option for you. You kind of need to go into building something with the option that failure will not happen no matter what. And you might still fail, but it shouldn't be because you thought that was an option starting a new project, right? And I think really, really great founders typically go into things with this mindset that there's just no way they're not going to succeed with this. And that aura spreads to the people they're bringing on board, to their investors, to their customers, to the media. Mm-hmm. So, build that mental resilience.
That's awesome. Like, lots of learning again. So awesome point on spending insane amount of time initially to build something, because if you don't work on the idea, it won't fly. It won't go anywhere. And then the hustle thing, it came up last night as well. We had a very interesting talk with Luminar Venture, Jacob Key and Magnus Grimeland. So we were talking about the same point. It came up exactly the same point. And we were discussing that in Nordics, probably the founders are used to operate like an iceberg. We try to develop 90% before the first 10% shows up on the top. So we are developing and not going out, being a little bit afraid of talking to customers, building pre-product traction. So I think amazing points over there. Let's switch a bit but before we switch, let's take a couple of questions from here. So Per has a question. What do you think are the most startup-friendly cities in Europe in terms of, for example, taxes, ability to offer ownership to employees, options, wealth tax, access to developers, investors, positive, innovative environments? Thank you. So based on your experience of building Antler, what are the most open cities in Europe or elsewhere? Yeah,
I think everyone has kind of different strengths, but my favorite cities is Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen, Helsinki, Amsterdam, Berlin, Munich, London, Paris, Lisbon, and Madrid. And that's where we are with Antler.
Okay.
Come to one of those locations. They all have very, very strong strengths, and some are stronger than others. It depends a bit what you want to build as well, right? Like, I think there are certain ecosystems that are stronger within specific areas. So you could also kind of look at the companies that have been very successful in that city and kind of see if that's the area you're building within. It might be a good place to go. But in general, I think, that's one thing to consider. You can consider these things I was just mentioned, but I think the most important thing in terms of choosing which one of these cities to build in, if Europe is the choice, is like, are there some of these places where you have a competitive advantage, right? So, for example, the reason why when we were building Antler, we were thinking about setting up the first program and HQ in London. We were thinking about San Francisco. We were thinking about New York. We were thinking about a few different cities. But we chose Singapore and Southeast Asia because I built my last business there. So my networks was just 10 times stronger. And then, probably very few people on this call even knows what Zalora is. But if you ask any person in tech, or literally any person at all in Southeast Asia, they'll know that company, right? So you should also look at, like, where do you have an unfair advantage? And that's where I'd start. And it could be an unfair advantage in terms of hiring people or getting a customer or getting investors on board, or if you have a family, it could be a place where your grandparents are, so that because as a founder you'll be really busy, so you might have someone who need to help you with your kids. Like, just look at how you can get as much kind of advantages as possible and optimize for that, A, and then B, you can start looking at these secondary things.
Very good point on unfair advantage. Let's take a couple of more questions. We are kind of close to our 45 minutes mark, so still 6-7 minutes to go. Let's see. So Shabnam has a question. Huge emphasis is paid on the importance of well-functioning teams which are agile for being successful as a startup. What key points should I focus on when building such a team? So you already mentioned, Magnus, when we're talking about that, like don't go after easy choices like a friend or a family member and easy like let's build something, but be hard on questioning. What other factors you think are important which really come into play for a successful startup down the road when building teams?
Yeah, let me share a story and then I'll get into the details of this. So like a few years ago, some research came out on dating apps, right? And I know this is a completely different topic, but it's related. So there's like dating apps and dating websites and so on, and they've kind of been in existence for the last 20 years or so, right? So you're starting to get pretty good data on people who met each other online versus people who kind of met each other organically per se, and how good their relationships are, their marriages, and so on. And apparently, if you meet online, you're on average more likely to be happier. The relationships on average will last longer, and the chance of divorce is lower, which is weird, right? Because you would think that when you meet organically, there's kind of networks there, and there's a reason why you ended up meeting each other and so on. So the conclusion people have come to is when you meet on a dating app or you meet on a website, and by the way, there's no right answer to any of these types of questions. Any way to meet can be successful. But the reason why they think that it's better is that when you meet people on these places, you come into the meetings with the people that you're meeting with a set of questions you want to get answered. So you ask the questions first, and then you fall in love after. But if you meet organically, you fall in love first, and then you ask the questions later, which might be too late because we're already in love, right? And I think, sometimes when people put together early team members and they choose a co-founder and so on, they fall in love first, and then they ask the critical questions after, which is why there's a lot of like founder breakups and early hires that doesn't work out and all these types of stuff. Because I know it's different from kind of meeting your wife or husband or whatever, but it's a very important choice who you choose to work with early. So like ask the critical questions first and then fall in love, instead of just picking someone who you happen to know for a very long time and you really enjoy spending time with, right? So how do you optimize the chances for that? Well, you should try to meet a lot of really smart people, right? So create a bigger funnel, right? If there are 3 people you're currently considering building a company with, increase that group to like 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. And how do you do that? Well, like go to places where these talents are and search people up on LinkedIn, right? If you think there was the founder of Coinbase or something, he just kind of found this co-founder on some sort of social network. So increase the group of people that you're talking to, step 1. Step 2 is go into those conversations with a set of questions you want to get answered. And some of those are big ones, right? Like, what are your strengths? What are your values? What do you think about the mission of what we're going to build? Are we going to build a company for generations, or are we going to build something as quickly as possible and sell it as quickly as possible, right? So some of these are big questions, and some are smaller questions, which is like, but still important. Like, who's going to be the CEO, right? A lot of startups fail because they can't decide who's going to be the CEO. It's super. Or like equity splits, or perhaps one person has kids and the other doesn't. And how do you deal with that in terms of kind of when you start working, how you work in the evenings, how you work in the weekends, vacations, all this type of stuff. So there's like less important questions, bigger questions, but like you should just write down the list of all of them and then ask the questions first and follow up later. So that's kind of A, build a big funnel, B, ask the right questions, three, then make a choice. Like, so I have a lot of great friends who actually didn't end up building something because they could never choose. As a founder, you need to make choices, and it will never be perfect, right? The idea you build will never be perfect when you start building it. The people you build your company will not be perfect. There aren't perfect people out there. And, so, you got to make choices. So, and how do you make that choice? Well, I think there are some criteria. So I think number one is pick someone you'd really, really enjoy spending time with and working with. Okay. That's the most important part. Common set of values, someone you can trust. So that I'd say is number one. Then number two is diversity of strengths. So getting someone in your team that is strong at something you're not strong at. That's number two. And number three, I'd say, is diversity of background. That could be gender, nationality, socioeconomic background, study different things, worked in different companies, whatever it might be. And number one is the most important, right? Like if you have that, then it's perfect. If that person is exactly the same as you, you'd rather build something with that person than someone who you don't have number one with, but you have number two and three. So one is the most important. Two, if you can get 1, 2, and 3, it's the best. But there are a tremendous amount of really great companies that are built by people who are completely similar. So, but there are very, very few great companies that have been built of people who, at least for 2 to 3 years, really, really enjoy working together, trust each other, have a common set of values, and so on, right? Like there might be founder breakup further down the line, right? You never know about this, but that's the way I'd think about this stuff.
Great. I think I'll summarize it for the community. Well, you yourself summarized it, but I'll re-summarize it. So build a bigger funnel. Don't stop at the first person or the second person that you meet. I think that's great advice. Like kind of network around, give this task the time it needs to get there. So without a funnel, it's very difficult to move forward. You'll be taking a compromised decision. Bigger funnel, ask hard questions. And great example on the dating side that you mentioned between the differences between IRL and the online. And then make a choice. So I think we are at the end of the session. I'll just quickly pick one question at a random, and then we'll close off the discussion. So Martin has a question. How can Nordic startups compete with Silicon Valley counterparts, given the substantial differences in investment levels?
Yeah. So let me just, I saw another question there, which I'd like to answer, which I think is nice. So
yeah, please.
I'll answer the second one. So how is Antler in corporate diversity? So we backed founders now from 141 different nations. 30% of our portfolio companies has a female co-founder, which compares to 1.8% of capital globally going to women. We back people from all socioeconomic backgrounds, all different religions. We're all about creating a quality of opportunity, and we think we can provide networks, access to capital, talent, which means that we're really leveling the playing field, no matter where you're coming from. So we can be very impactful to people who have been very lucky in life and they went to the best universities and worked in the best companies and already have great networks. We can provide our network, but also anyone who grew up in a slum in Mumbai or was a refugee from a war in the Middle East and just came to Sweden. We can provide the same networks to everyone, which I think helps level the playing field. And we just want to invest in great people. And I think our stats show that. In terms of competing against companies from Silicon Valley, right? So, the advantages you used to have there was I think not capital was definitely one of them, but one of the great things there is you could access really great talent and you could access really great mentors, right? And then capital. If you're in Sweden right now, like if you plug into the right networks, whether it's through Antler or another angel investor or other VCs, you can access incredible people in the Nordics, no? Like Like the companies that have been built out of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland over the last few years, it's just incredible. And they're world leading companies. So some of the mentors you can access there are better, are way better than average you can access in the Valley. There are more of them there, but at the same time, there's more startups. So, you know, there's no excuse to talent, like hiring people, engineers and so on in the Valley now is almost impossible, which is why a lot of, you know, startups in the Valley actually end up setting their HQ up in another American city, or they very quickly set up an office in another place to access talent. In Europe right now and in the Nordics, you can access insanely great talent at actually lower cost than in the Valley. And that's flipped. It used to be different, but it's flipped over the last 10, 20 years. And then access to capital, right? Like the biggest VCs in the world invest anywhere. And sure, you know, your seed round might be at a slightly lower valuation, or your Series A might be at a slightly lower valuation, which is actually true. Like valuations in Europe are slightly lower than the US, but valuations in Europe are higher than in Asia, and valuations in Asia are higher than in Africa. It's, you know, it's just a competitive ecosystem. But you can access, once you kind of go up the stages, you can access all the capital that you need. You just need to get the right introductions. And the VCs in the Nordics, including Antler, can make those. We have relationships with 3,075 VCs, 2,600 angels and family offices. So, you know, sure, there's still advantages of building in the Valley, but there are also advantages of building in the Nordics. And it's not clear to me that, you know, there's any disadvantage. If anything, there's possibly an advantage to building it out of the Nordics, if that's where you come from.
Okay. Great points, Magnus. We have overclocked by 5 minutes. We're very thankful that you could join us for the first session of Connect Talks. Really honored that you're here, and you've been with us and with me previously in these talks. So really thankful for taking the time out. We see Antler as a big success. We're already in touch with your Nordic team, and we see how Connect and Antler can move forward. But thank you so much for today. Any last message you have for entrepreneurs and investors who joined us on today? Any parting thought you would like to say?
Well, you know, if you want to follow what we're doing, you know, you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, so on. If you want to support from Antler, go to antler.co and click apply. And hopefully we get to work with you if we're not already doing so. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Magnus, and have a great day, evening. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.